Welcome back, everyone. Let's talk through this classwork on variation. Today's classwork is designed to introduce the concept of variation and how it relates to measurement in the sciences and social sciences. This classwork will also provide us with an introduction to a free statistical software program called JASP, and it allows us to practice reading data from visualizations. Now, the questions and prompts in the classwork are designed to help you think more deeply about our topics. Some questions will be more difficult than others. Feel free to skip questions and come back to them, or to simply note what you're unsure of, confused by, or what you're thinking about. The important part is that you're thinking and strengthening those neural pathways in your brain. I encourage you to pause this video to take notes, write down your answers, or pause and discuss with classmates. And if you are using a digital file, remember to save often. So let's start with measuring fingers. Research in the social sciences can be hard because we're constantly trying to measure invisible stuff like efficacy, intelligence, memory, perception, ethnic identity, and so on. Then we want to figure out whether this stuff changes or it can be improved or if it's different across different groups of people and so on. However, it all starts with figuring out those measurements in the first place. How do we know how much of that thing someone has? So let's start by measuring something easy today, fingers. Our goal today is to accurately measure each of your fingers on one hand to the nearest millimeter. This is a little trickier to do online than in person, where we all have printed copies of the same ruler, but the measurements themselves are ultimately not as important as the concept here. So, using a ruler, a tape measure, or a website like iruler.net, measure your non-dominant hand's fingers. If you're right-handed, measure your left hand. If you're left-handed, measure your right hand. Measure each finger from the tip of the finger to the little fold or joint where your finger meets your palm. So go ahead and pause and measure and record your data right above number 1. And make sure that you're using the small millimeter measurement on the ruler. It's usually the smallest one you typically see on a ruler. Now take a moment and reflect. What are some important characteristics about a person that you think can affect how long their fingers are? There are no right or wrong answers here. Just make note of some of the things that come to mind. Maybe discuss this with classmates. Now get together with someone else in your household or social bubble. Don't show them your finger measurements. Without giving them any specific directions, have them measure your fingers to the nearest millimeter and record those measurements on your classwork. Note, side note, if you're in quarantine or you otherwise can't get together with a partner, don't sweat it. Maybe try measuring your fingers again, but this time using your dominant hand as little as possible to help you, right? So if you can't get together with somebody, not the end of the world. Now, after you've had a chance to record your second set of measurements, take a look at these two sets of measurements. Did you get two identical sets of measurements for your fingers? After all, your fingers have presumably not changed much in length in a couple of minutes. So on number 2, did you get identical measurements? And if you didn't come up with those, then why do you think that is? What are some things that we could do if we wanted to make these measurements more consistent? So in other words, how could we try to reduce the variability in our measurements, right? The same fingers being measured twice. How can we sort of try to reduce the variability, the differences we see between those two sets of measurements? And then, do you think we can completely reduce the variability in measurement? Why or why not? Again, these might be some good things to discuss in the chat, in the discussion board, and come back to if you're unsure. Now, one goal in statistics is to try to explain some of the variation we see in measurements. So, again, if you're unsure, that's okay, but what do you think it means to explain variation, right? So those variation meaning those differences that we see. And do you think that explaining variation means that the variation just goes away, right? Once we explain it, is the variation no more? Is there no more variation? Okay, so again, you may want to discuss some of those with your classmates. Now, next up is our lab. And in this lab, we're going to explore the distribution of fingers from a group of statistics classes similar to ours. We'll be using the statistical software package, JASP, to help us examine our data and conduct analyses. I've broken the lab up into multiple videos, but before you get started on that, I encourage you to pause and learn more about JASP, including how you can access it for free, um, and make sure you look it up before you move on to the lab if you've not already done so. I also encourage you to open the provided data file for this assignment in JASP and work along with me as we begin exploring the data, if you're able to.